Welcome, Dr. Epic here, and in this lecture we're going to talk about the crossing of the waters of the world by ancient explorers. And along the way we're going to meet the eunuch-admiral of Ming China, the Vikings of the North Atlantic, and discuss the impossible glass of ancient Egypt. We're going to follow that outline right up above my little yellow box as we attempt to answer the question of who discovered America. So who did discover America? The obvious answer is, of course, Christopher Columbus. After all, everyone's heard the poem in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And no one seriously disputes the fact that Christopher Columbus led a Spanish effort across the Middle Atlantic in the late 15th century. There are copious artifacts across the Caribbean of Spanish origin. And after all, more than half the Western Hemisphere today speaks Spanish. So clearly Christopher Columbus did cross the ocean in 1492. But was he the first? And many people have argued that there were earlier oceanic crossings centuries before Christopher Columbus. Whether it's Thor Heyerdahl, who argued that the ancient Egyptians crossed the Atlantic Ocean. But the thing is, this is an extraordinary claim. The Egyptians crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Do they have evidence to support this? Because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So basically, you can take your pick of any of the ancient peoples, and somewhere, sometimes, somebody has claimed that they crossed the ocean and reached the Americas. A partial list includes, but is not limited to, the ancient Romans, the ancient Egyptians, ancient Phoenicians, Shang Dynasty Chinese, Bronze Age Africans, Jewish refugees, Vikings, Basque fishermen, Syrian colonists, Polynesians and their chickens, Welsh explorers, and Irish monks. All of these people have had serious claims that these individuals crossed the Atlantic, crossed the Pacific to reach the Americas. People have made these extraordinary claims, but do they have the extraordinary evidence to support it? We are actually going to pick two of these claims and investigate them. The first, did Ming Dynasty China discover America? Now, that right up above me, that is an individual called Gavin Menzies. And Gavin Menzies wrote a book called 1421, the year that China discovered America. And he's built this argument that says basically this real person, a real Chinese explorer of the 15th century, a eunuch-admiral called Zheng He, crossed the northern Pacific and sailed up and down the western coast of North America. Now, was Zheng He a real person? And the answer is yes. Zheng He was a real person. He lived approximately between 1371 and 1433. Now, he was a eunuch-admiral. A group of eunuchs ruled China at the time. He was a eunuch-admiral. He commanded a large fleet, and he made a series of historically known voyages across the Pacific and around the Indian Ocean. And if you look at that map there on the lower left, that is a map of the voyages of Zheng He as he sailed his great treasure fleet around Indochina and around the coasts of India. He even made it all the way to Africa and back. And some of these boats of Zheng He were quite huge. The largest one was almost 120 meters long. No one disputes that Zheng He was a real person. No one disputes that Zheng He was a great explorer and navigator. But the question is, he made it to Africa. Could he have made it to America? Gavin Menzies says yes. And in that map on the upper left, that is the proposed voyage that Menzies has argued, Zheng He's route to America. So Menzies argues that Zheng He could have crossed the Pacific, following the coastal rim across Siberia, across the coast of Alaska, down the American west coast, sailing on these massive Ming Dynasty ships. And these ships are much larger than the caravels that carried Christopher Columbus and his crew across the Middle Atlantic. And so that's the question. Is Menzies right? Could the great eunuch-admiral explorer Zheng He have traveled to North America? Could he have done this? The answer is yes. Yes, Zheng He could have done it. If he would have had his mind to it, if he would have sailed along this route, he certainly possessed the technology to do so. But the question is not, could he have done it? Did he have the capacity to do it? The question is, did he actually do it? Did Zheng He reach California? And is there extraordinary evidence to support Gavin Menzies' extraordinary claim that Zheng He made it all the way to America? One of the pieces of evidence that's used is the fact that Chinese anchor stones have been found off the coast of California. There they are. These are real Chinese anchor stones. They were recovered from the ocean floor just off the coast of California. And now the way this works is that Chinese fishing ships use these. They haul the boats, they carve a tunnel, they tie a rope, and they anchor off of a point, and then they do their fishing, and when they're done, they cut them loose. So this is why, if Chinese ships are sailing in a region, you're gonna find anchor stones that look exactly like this. And here these anchor stones, these come from California. They are identical to anchor stones found off the coast of China. And dozens of these stones have been recovered off the coast of California. Could they be the anchor stones from the voyages of Zheng He? Or is there a simpler explanation? Are these very real anchor stones from other kinds of Chinese ships? Well, probably. Because you see, in the late 19th century, in the late 1800s, Chinese immigrants in Northern California, in fact, built traditional style Chinese ships and proceed to sail them up and down the coast of California. And they used traditional Chinese anchor stones. From about 1870 to 1920, it is not uncommon to see Chinese style ships sailing around San Francisco, sailing up and down the coast of California, all the way to Los Angeles and Baja California. And that's what these photographs are right up above my head. Right there, that is a traditional Chinese ship built in California, sailing underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And yes, these ships made use of anchor stones. So the argument, the simpler argument, from Occam's razor, is that these are real Chinese anchor stones, but they're not from the great fleets of Zhang in the Ming Dynasty. They're from Chinese immigrants in the 19th century. The thing is that Zheng He's voyages, his crossing of the Pacific and his reaching of North America, has been embraced in China. You see this repeated on Chinese websites and in Chinese textbooks. They sort of state, Zheng He discovered America. And Zheng He has had this great kind of revival in the last 20 years in China. He's got a big statue. There's actually been ships named after him. That is the Zheng He right up above me. He even had a really popular television show about him made in Hong Kong. And many of these things include the claim that it was not Christopher Columbus who first discovered the New World, but Zheng He. China, a newly emergent and wealthy People's Republic of China, likes the idea that Zheng He discovered America. But did he? Or, like the Cardiff Giant, are they fooled because they want to be fooled? Do they believe that he discovered America because they want to believe? Do they like this extraordinary claim, not because there's extraordinary evidence to support it, but because it already fits their pre-existing ideas in their head? What is the extraordinary evidence of Zheng He's voyages? And the answer is, there isn't any. There's just anchor stones that are probably from the 19th century, not the 15th. Let's move on to another extraordinary claim about the crossing and the discovery of the New World. And this is going to start in the 1950s with the husband-wife team of Helga and Anna Ingstad. And they had a truly mad idea throughout the 1950s. Helge Ingstad, 1899 to 2001, he was a really, really old guy when he died. Now, he was already a famed Arctic explorer and writer by the 1950s, and both he and his wife had read these ancient Norse accounts of crossing open oceans and finding land on the other side of the Atlantic. These Viking sagas describing the exploration and colonization of a new world. And from these, the Ingstads concluded two things. A, that the Vikings had reached North America around AD 1000, 492 years before Columbus. And B, that a series of failed Viking colonies must have been planted along the eastern shores of Canada, because that's the most logical place to put a Viking colony. And they weren't alone in this idea. This had been an idea that had been discussed for a long time. And there are real histories that describe this. There are a pair of Norse sagas that describe the voyages of these two individuals, Eric the Red and his son, Leif Erikson. Now, these sagas, these histories, and that's a copy of what one of them looked like right there. And there's the Vinland map over there. They describe the exploration of Iceland, the colonization of Greenland, and the discovery of a land beyond the Atlantic Ocean, a land that the Vikings call Vinland. It's located to the west of Greenland, and this is what they describe in the Viking sagas. It's called Vinland because wild grapes grew there on vines, and they grew on rocky hillsides, and this Viking colony, in the sagas, flourishes for a few years before coming under attack by the local people of Vinland, a group of people that the Vikings called the Skraelings. And eventually the Vikings had to abandon their colony as attacks from the Skraelings grew too intense, and these colonies eventually failed. But again, let's ask the same question we asked about Zheng He, let's ask that about the Vikings. The Vikings had very good ships. The Viking longships were capable of incredible voyages in very difficult conditions. Could the Vikings have done this? Could they have crossed the North Atlantic? The answer is yes, they could have done it. After all, the Vikings did reach Iceland. No one disputes that. The Vikings did reach Greenland. No one disputes that. But could they have reached North America? And Helge and Anna Ingstad were not the first people to actually suggest this. Indeed, this is an old idea in the 19th century that Vikings discovered the New World. But the thing is that almost everyone had rejected it. They're like, this is crazy myths. These are just stories that are made up. There's no real evidence that supports this. But the difference between the Ingstads and everyone else who discussed this is that Helge and Anna Ingstad said, we're going to go out and find the evidence. We're going to use archaeological science to prove that the Vikings crossed the Atlantic Ocean. And that's what they set out to do, to locate the extraordinary evidence that supports this extraordinary claim. So, okay, they very carefully read the Viking sagas. Okay, it's got to be a place where wild grapes grow. It's got to have rocky hillsides. It's got to be a place with good fresh water. It's got to have a good view of the sea. Vikings are always orienting their settlements towards the ocean. And Vikings don't like big, deep harbors. They actually like shallow harbors where they can drag the long ships right up on the beach to like fix and repair them. So basically, they make a list of what a Viking would be looking for in a place to build a colony. And then they proceed to sail up and down the coast of eastern Canada. They make a series of candidates. This might work. There's wild grapes here, but no beach. There's no beach, but there's wild grapes. Until they find a place that actually fits what the Vikings would like in a place to build a settlement. And they decided this place was called Jellyfish Cove, and it's located up there on the map on the eastern shore of Canada. But Jellyfish Cove is kind of a dumb name. The Ingstads very much preferred the local Quebecois name for the place, which was l'Anse aux Meadows. Knowing the enormous burden of proof facing them, the Ingstads moved very, very carefully. They're not going to find a bunch of anchor stones and then claim they're from the 15th century. Instead, they're going to move very, very carefully. And very slow and meticulous excavations proceeded across the area around L'Anse Meadows. And there's a photograph of their excavations right up above me. So basically, they excavate from 61, 62, and 63. They spend 3 years digging around this harbor, very carefully documenting everything they find, because they know to prove this extraordinary claim, they need the extraordinary evidence. And one of the first things they find as they start excavating around L'Anse Meadows is the remains of these structures called sod houses. Now, sod houses is a style of domestic architecture that's quite common in Greenland, it's quite common in Iceland, and it is completely unknown in North America. This is a Norse style of architecture. It's Viking architecture, these sod houses. And in fact, looking right up above me, that is what one of the remains of the sod houses that they found at L'Anse Meadows. There on the lower left, that's what one of these sod houses looks like, reconstructed. And in fact, when these structures fall apart, they're basically just cut pieces of earth, kind of stacked and covered with grass. And actually, the grass helps actually hold the building together. But when one of these buildings falls apart, it doesn't so much collapse as kind of melt back into the earth. So if you look at the photographs right up above me, you can see right up above me is the remains of one of the sod houses from L'Anse Meadows. And over there is the ruins of a sod house from Greenland. So you can see this incredible amount of similarity. The Ingsteds found Viking architecture in eastern Canada, but they need more than that. So they start excavating around the sod houses, and what they find are these things. A number of artifacts located around this domestic architecture. They find bone needles, they find glass beads, they find iron cloak pens. So Vikings would really dramatically wrap themselves in cloaks and then slide a pen so that it holds it all together. And in fact, I think that's what that is right in the middle. Cloak pen. All of these types of artifacts are very common in Greenland. They're very common in Iceland. They're very common in Norway. And again, completely unknown among Native Americans. Native Americans couldn't make glass. Native Americans couldn't make iron. Native Americans couldn't make things like sawn planks for longships. That's what that is right up above me. All of these artifacts are similar to what's in Greenland, what's in Iceland, what's in Norway, what's in Scandinavia. They are completely alien to Native America. And then the Ingsteds found the mother lode, an iron smeltery. They located an iron smelt where basically individuals take iron-laden soils, heat them up, purify them, and can make iron. They make a very crude iron. Right there in the middle, that is a photograph of the iron smelt that was located by Helga and Anna Ingstad. And it's a Norwegian-style smelt for making very crude iron tools. And as a smelt, to create the iron ingots and to make these very simple tools requires an enormous amount of fuel. It requires an enormous amount of water. But as a smelt, because it's having to burn a lot of wood to get really high temperatures to make iron, that means it's going to generate an enormous amount of carbon and slag. And right up above me, there is the iron slag. So clearly this was a smelt. Somebody was clearly using this to create iron. And then from all of this carbon, they could radiocarbon date it. And what they found was that the radiocarbon dating of the burned material from the smelt dated to between 975 and 1020 AD. In other words, this smelt was in operation in exactly the same time that the Viking sagas claim that Leif Erikson and Eric the Red crossed the North Atlantic. Is this extraordinary evidence? Does the evidence that they found support the theories proposed by Helga and Anna Ingstad? Do they have extraordinary evidence to support their extraordinary claim? And the answer is, of course, yes. And no one seriously disputes that 400 years, almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus, Vikings crossed the North Atlantic and encountered the Native Americans of the land that we today call Eastern Canada. And this is why the Viking presence in pre-Columbian America is widely accepted. But it is also the reason why no one believes that Zheng He crossed the North Pacific, because there's no evidence for this. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Now, I want to talk about how actual archaeology can actually produce incredible ideas, and how the truth about the ancient past is far more fantastic than any modern fiction writer can dream up. I want to kind of pause for a moment and talk about what real archaeology can actually reveal, because often it can reveal things far more fantastic about the ancient past than Cardiff giants or Atlantean pyramids or ancient aliens or Pacific crossing eunuch-admirals. And a lot of these sort of, exercises in critical thinking tend to emerge, they tend to convey a message of extreme cynicism. And I want to kind of dispel that cynicism. The actual exploration of the human past can encounter wonders far more fantastic than Ming China crossing the Pacific Ocean. Because I want to tell you the story about the impossible glass of ancient Egypt. There it is, the impossible glass. The tombs of ancient Egypt yield many beautiful and wonderful things like that. And one of the odder objects that came out of these pharaonic tombs, the tombs of the pharaohs, are this very clear yellow-green glass. And you can see it right in the middle of that pectoral. The glass was used with reverence, and it was often treated with a skill and a talent that the Egyptians reserved for gemstones, not simple natural glass. And in fact, if you look at that pectoral on the left, that's a gold pectoral. And in the center of this golden jewelry, that yellow-green back of the scarab there, that's glass. That's a piece of glass. So, today we look at it and we'd say, like, why in the middle of gold and gems and jewels did they just put a piece of glass? And in fact, that is a piece of golden jewelry from the tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun himself. So that jewelry dates to the year 1325 BC. And this was always kind of an archaeological mystery. Like, why did the ancient Egyptians value this type of glass so highly? Most of the people just went, it's just a very strange thing to place a piece of glass in the middle of this jewelry. But in the late 1990s, mineralogists and geologists began to actually look at the structure of this glass. And they said, well, this is a really interesting glass. It's very, very dense. It's a highly dense, highly pure glass. So who actually made this kind of glass? Was it natural? Did the Egyptians make it? And that's when things got weird. Because we actually can't make that type of glass today. To achieve the level of clarity and density in glass requires high temperatures. And to achieve the clarity and density of the impossible glass of ancient Egypt requires temperatures in excess of 1800 degrees Celsius. If we convert that to Fahrenheit, that's 3200 degrees Fahrenheit. There's only one place on Earth where we have those kind of temperatures today, and that is in the interior of atomic reactors. In the 21st century, we actually cannot make the impossible glass without making it in the middle of an atomic reactor, which would make it like incredibly radioactive. So how did the Egyptians get access to glass that has to be made, in temperatures of excess of 1800 degrees Celsius? Were the Egyptians forging glass inside of atomic reactors? That's very strange. So people begin to look at, like, where does this glass come from? What could have created this glass? And one of the things they started to explore was the great deserts of Western Egypt. It's a desert that is so barren and so remote and so lifeless that it's just called the Sea of Sand. And inside the Sea of Sand, they discovered a series of impact craters. And it was the impact craters actually line up in a line that goes from the northwest to the southeast in this arc that stretches from Libya all the way to the Red Sea. And in and around each of these impact craters is a field of this incredibly dense yellow-green clear glass. And they mapped these things out, and then they arrived at an incredible conclusion that these impact craters and this glass is of extraterrestrial origin, probably around 800,000 years ago, although that date is actually kind of disputed. In the distant past, an object came from outer space. It came from outer space and it broke apart as it encountered Earth's atmosphere. It might have been an asteroid. It might have been a small comet of some kind. And as this extraterrestrial object sort of struck Earth's atmosphere and broke apart, the burning fragments came down from the sky and they impacted across the Sea of Sand in a rough line. You can look at that map right up above me and it shows the path and trajectory of these impact craters as these extraterrestrial fragments struck the Sea of Sand, one after another, bam, 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 leaving this line of impact craters. And every time one of these extraterrestrial objects struck the sand, it exploded with the force of several atomic bombs. And the heat was so great from the impact that it fused the sand of the desert and created this unusually pure and dense glass. And this is what some of the images look like from the research into, the impossible glass. Right up above me is a line of impact craters. There is one of the desert impact craters there on the upper left, and scattered all around these impact craters, just lying on the desert floor, the impossible glass of ancient Egypt. And that's what it looks like today. Today it has a more prosaic name. It's just called Libyan desert glass. This impossible glass is again now known as Libyan desert glass, and it seems to have been highly prized by the ancient Egyptians. They would send people out, it's very dangerous to do this. They would send people out deep into the Sea of Sand to look, for the impossible glass that was scattered across the desert, and they would bring it back from the distant desert, and the Egyptians would prize it so much that they would polish it and sand it and place it and treat it just like a precious gem and give it to the ancient pharaohs to wear. The ancient Egyptians prized this impossible glass. And so, again, to show you what actual archaeological science can do, the wonders that a real science can convey to you, everything about the sentence I'm about to say is 100% true. The tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun has jewelry that originated in outer space and was forged by atomic fire. Absolutely true, revealed by an actual active archaeological science. Next, using archaeological science and our newly discovered powers of critical thinking, we will address a truly fantastic topic about the human past. Did the Trojan War actually happen? And that's what we'll discuss next time, and I will see you there. you want to be in the lecture? Do you want to be in the lecture, Alfred? Does not want to be in the lecture.